I was talking about suffering towards the end of my lecture yesterday, and that in many ways it is one way of aligning our will with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of showing complete obedience and ibadah to Allah. When others suffer, by the way, not only do they suffer, in many ways we suffer with them. Not only are they tested, but we are tested too. If you recall, I mentioned that there are stages in being that fortitude of persevering on the truth, of sabr, that is sabir, sabur, and mutasabir. One who is patient, and then one who goes beyond just patient, who actually radiates patience, and then is able to generate patience for others. It's very important that the Quran itself says, because of that patience, of the sabr that people have, even the malaika, when a person dies, due to the patience, the malaika will greet them, Salamun alaykum bima sabartum, fa ni'ma uqbad dar. Peace be upon you, because of how strong you were, because of your patience. This is the best abode for those who have patience. Because of what I had talked last night, of that individual who is God-centered, who in many ways has got that taqwa. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib says, there are those individuals whom God speaks to directly. Extraordinary powers are given to them. When human beings are spiritually close to the divine, as Imam Ali reminds us, they experience the world in a very different way. They see what others do not see. They hear what others do not hear. Regarding sorrow, I thought I would share these couplets from Rumi before we go on to today's lecture. Rumi says that sorrow prepares you for joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can have space to enter. Sorrow shakes the yellow leaves from the bough of your heart so that fresh green leaves can grow in their place. It pulls up the rotten roots so that new roots hidden beneath can have room to grow. Whatever sorrow shakes from your heart, far better things will take their place. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. The topic that I've chosen for tonight is a very different one from the theme that I've been speaking on. But I still think that is an important topic, which is that of how do we know what we know? We hear so much about KARBALA all the time, that this guy said this guy did that. How do we know about it? It's an important dimension for us to understand KARBALA, because many a time things have been mixed up. Things have been spiced up, embellished. And in many ways, a good historian is like a detective. When you see a detective, he tries to bring together different parts and pieces to form what is called a composite picture. What's a composite picture? A picture of different things so as to form a reasonable account of what may have happened. Many a time when the detectives are looking for somebody, they do not know exactly what he looks like. They draw up a composite picture to help you frame. So in many ways, the events of KARBALA, and looking at any part of history, by the way, falls along the same lines. Let us not forget that we are dealing with an oral culture. Oral culture means basically that everything is transmitted orally. There were a few people writing, yes, but the majority in the early period of Islam was oral. Now you may say that, how could they have remembered so much? An important question. Let us not forget also that when people cannot read or write, then they memorize far more. Instead of depending on their eyesight, they depend far more on the insight. When I was young, which wasn't very long ago, but when I was younger, just a few years ago, seriously though, you'll remember also we used to go to these majalises and you used to hear Ravi Kehta hai. Do you remember that? And in my own view, I used to think there was a person called Ravi, whose name was Ravi, in my very amateurish way. And he maybe was just walking around with a piece of paper. Well, Ravi literally means a narrator. We need to go beyond just the question of Ravi. We need to find out who these people were. Let us also remember this much, that when we are talking of Karbala in particular, we're not talking of one singular source of information. In fact, we're talking of Sunni and Shia sources also. In many instances, we depend more on Sunnis than Shias for Karbala, and for much of the early period of history. So let's not forget that we only report from Shias. We do not do that. The other problem is that many myths and legends have been mixed with the story of Karbala. I have to be honest with you. Shaheed Mutahari, Ayatollah Mutahari, has a book in which he talks of the distortions of Ashura. It's in English now, by the way, and you can go online probably and look it up. But it's an important dimension for us to know what really happened, or to the reasonable extent of what really happened. We need to dissect and analyze to come up with a reasonably accurate picture. Another point that we should also remember, contrary to what we may think, the Sunnis also mourn for Karbala. It's not just an Shia event. It's wrong for us to think that this was a battle between Shias and Sunnis. In fact, many of those who fought Imam Hussein in Karbala were the ones who invited him in the first place. And Imam Hussein called them out on the day of Ashur. Shabath, you told me that the dates have ripened. You told me that the fruits have grown. And you asked me to come. Where are you now? That was just one example. In fact, Imam Hussein, when Umar ibn Sa'd asked Imam Hussein, why did you come here? Imam Hussein opened 2 bags full of letters from the people of Kufa. He says, this is why I came here. So for us to think this was a Sunni-Shia battle is wrong. In fact, Sunnis, they may not mourn it the way that we do. They may not do the matam. But they still feel the sadness too, that this was something wrong that happened to the Ahlul Bayt and to the grandson of the Prophet in particular. Another myth that you may have heard of is that Yazid himself repented or regretted what happened. There is absolutely no report which says that Yazid was in any way sorry. In fact, had he repented, for example, then he would have taken some action against those who perpetrated the events in Karbala. On the contrary, he did not. So there is no remorse that we see from Yazid. I would also say that we do not need to exaggerate or embellish Karbala at all. The message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is strong enough. We do not need what we call to spice it up at all, because the message of Imam Hussein is strong enough in itself. Mutahari, who I talked of a minute or so ago, talks of the tahrif. Tahrif basically means to change the words so that you have the story, but the words are changed in such a way that the whole story changes. That's just one way of changing the events in Karbala. Sometimes people have invented stories for the simple reason because of money, to be very honest, just to make people cry. One important scholar here was a person by the name of Mirza Nouri, and he says very clearly that the motive for reciting Karbala should not be for making money. On the contrary, it should be for the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada himself. The fact that Nouri, who lived in the 19th century, said this shows clearly that he was aware that things were happening, things that were not proper. As a speaker myself, there are certain things that you may have heard of that I would not recite personally, because I think that anybody who recites for Imam Hussein is taking on a major, major responsibility. And he or she has that responsibility to portray or to convey the message as accurately as possible. I've been talking about aql continuously in my lectures. We need to use that aql also in narrating Karbala. Just because something is written in a book, if it defies logic, if it defies reasoning, I personally, and I don't think anybody should cite it, because ultimately we are responsible in front of Imam Hussein, in front of the Prophet, and in front of Allah. For example, you may have heard that there were 1 million soldiers in Karbala. Some say, 500,000 and so on. Kufa itself, the town of Kufa, was established during the time of Umar, 35 years before Karbala. And the reason why Umar established Kufa was because it was what we call a garrison town, an outpost, if you like, where soldiers who had gone to Iraq were camped in that little place called Kufa. By the time of Karbala, the maximum number of people, maximum number in Kufa was 100,000. That's the maximum, probably less. If it had a maximum people of 100,000, and most of those who perpetrated Karbala was just a small portion from the people of Kufa, where do we get 500,000 from? As I say, we need to be careful in what we cite. People say, how can anybody ever think of fabricating hadith? Well, welcome to the real world. Because hadith fabrication was there from the time of the Prophet himself. Let's be absolutely honest. To the extent that there is a very famous hadith from the Prophet himself, where the Prophet says, "Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan, falyatabaw maq'adahu fin nar." Whoever conscientiously, seriously fabricates a tradition against me, let him or her, it was mainly a him, I have to admit, let him take his place in hell. In other words, a person who fabricates a hadith against the Prophet should take his place in hell. Later on, interestingly, during the time of the Banu Abbasid, there were hadith fabricators who prided themselves in fabricating hadith. They would go on the members, Qala Rasulullah, you pray so many rakat, you go to Jannah, each Jannah will have so many doors, and each door will have so many castles. How many castles do you need in Jannah anyway? So somebody went up to this sheikh who was fabricating hadith, and he says, Ittaqillaha ya sheikh, be scared of God. How can you fabricate hadith from the Prophet when he said very clearly, whoever has fabricated hadith against me will go to hell? And the sheikhs, these people, storytellers, are very clever. He said, La nukadhibu alay nukadhibu la. We are not lying against the Prophet, we are lying for him. So it's okay. In other words, we're getting people to pray more. But still, the essence remains the same. Many a time, people do not fabricate hadith. They use poetry to express their love and their feelings. And the language of poetry is always imaginary. In other words, people think of things and they expect you to take it in that spirit. So for example, you may hear that it rained blood. Rain blood does not mean it literally was raining blood on the day of Ashura. It shows how or what a great disaster that was, that even the skies cried, so to speak. In English, many a time you say, it rained cats and dogs. Now, does it really mean that? Or till the cows come home. So these are all figurative ways of mentioning it. So we should not be taking these literally, they should be taken metaphorically. One other point. Having problem with the mic?
There's a vehicle out there, CKAR 883. Lights are on. I want to make sure you get home safely.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'm not a problem. Okay, that's important. We want people to get home. These are just some of the pointers that we need to clarify so that people have a better understanding of Karbala. Another question was that of Dhul Jinah. And people will always say, Dhul Jinah is always evokes emotions, correctly. But there was no Dhul Jinah in Karbala. Sorry to disappoint you. The name was given to a horse later on. Dhul Jinah means, Dhu in Arabic means the one who possesses. Dhul Jinah, one who has wings. In other words, it could fly. It was a poetic way of saying that the horse of Imam Hussein was very fast. The actual name of the horse of Imam Hussein we are given in the sources called Lahiq. Lahiq was the name of the horse of Imam Hussein. The poet gave it that name, as I say, to show that the horse was very fast. In fact, on the day of Ashur, Imam Hussein gave Lahiq to Ali Akbar initially. Then he rode it himself. And people, of course, they love to trace things to the Prophet. Oh, this was the Prophet's horse. Sorry. horses only live for 25, 30 years, not longer than that. I Googled it just to be sure. And because you have to be careful what you say. So therefore, Karbala occurred 49 years after the wafat of the Prophet. So it could not possibly have been a horse from the Prophet. However, horses in that period were different from the horses now. We just ride them. In those days, because they depended on the horses so much, they trained them, they bred them, and therefore, when the horse came back, when Lahi came back, after Imam Hussein was killed, without the saddle, showing emotions, because horses also have emotions, and they have ways of showing emotions. We hear in some hadith, by the way, that when Imam Hussein was on the ground, his horse would actually surround the Imam. He would go around him to stop people coming towards him. And that can make sense because, as I say, horses are emotional too. So, the key figure, unfortunately, here we have to mention is a person by the name of Mullah Hussein Kashifi. Now, in those days, mullah meant a lot. Today, anybody who's got a book is a mullah. Huh? In those days, a mullah was a real scholar. Mullah Hussein Kashifi has a book called Rawdatul Shuhada, the garden of those who are shaheed. He died in the year 1504, which is approximately 800 years after the events in Karbala. I'm not suggesting at all that he created or he made up stories, but basically he was not a very careful mullah, shall we say. He just collected traditions whereas and whenever he got them and put them together in this book called Rawdatul Shuhada. And it became a very popular book with time, so much so that whoever would recite anything about Karbala would use that book regardless of its authenticity. In Iran, if you go, they have Rawze Khane or Rawze Khan. Those people who recite the Rawze, what we do when we recite for Imam Hussein, are called Rawze. There are those who are specialists in that particular field. You go to the mosque sometime, or you go to people's houses, these people are invited with the sole purpose of making people cry. People enjoyed it. They feel that a relief within them, which is all right in itself. But the idea was that it should be at least accurate. For a longest period, you will remember, we used to say, Hena Mendi, Hena Kangrana Sera. You remember that? Well, until we later learned that there was no wedding of Qasim on the day of Ashur. It comes from the time of Kashifi. Similarly, you may have even heard of Zafar Jinn or lions coming to the desert and so on to Karbala. These are things that came much later on. Perhaps one of the more popular myths was that Imam Hussein, Na'udzubillah, killed 300,000 people alone in Karbala. Have you heard that? Well, Mutahari says this, okay? He said that he worked it out, that if, Na'udzubillah, Imam Hussein was to kill one person every second he would kill one person, it would take him 83 hours to kill 300,000 people. The Karbala lasted only for a few hours, the events of Karbala. So, one important source that I would suggest to you strongly to read if you can is the one by Shahid, it's called Shahid Insaniyat, The Martyrs of Karbala. It was written by a professor in Aligarh University, Nakkan Sab. Some of you may have heard about him. Nakkan Sab was a great scholar, and he also was a very careful scholar. He would not just recite anything from anywhere. He, that is Nakkan Sab, in his book, I have it at home, he depicts Imam Hussein not as some kind of mythical, legendary figure, but a historical figure who stands up for human principles, principles that we all share. For him, Nakkan Sab, that is, Karbala was to make sure that we become spiritually aware human beings, conscientious, that we can identify with the principles that Imam Hussein stood for. He stood up for truth, justice, against oppression. And believe it or not, Nakkan Sab was condemned for that. In many ways, he was even regarded as a kafir. Remember the takfir word? So, a key figure, and this is something that we should try and remember, was a person by the name of Abu Mikhnaf, when he reports about Karbala. Abu Mikhnaf was born at about the same time that Karbala occurred. He was not there at Karbala. He died approximately 90 years after the events in Karbala. He was a prolific scholar. He wrote about 32 books. And even Western scholars, they have studied Abu Mikhnaf, have found him to be reliable. What Abu Mikhnaf does is to cite eyewitness accounts. He wasn't there in Karbala, but he took a deep interest in what happened in Karbala. So he cites eyewitness accounts. Many a time he says that haddathani, meaning that he narrated to me, or qad shahida maqtalul Hussein. He witnessed the killing of Imam Hussein. Kana qad shahida, he saw the qatlul Hussein. Many a time he is just one intermediary between him and the one who actually was there, witnessed the killing of Imam Hussein. His work, by the way, the original work is no longer there. It's not extant. We do not have it. But we have a redaction, or redaction is summary by his student of his called Al-Kalbi. Another source that we need to talk about very briefly is Tabari. You may have heard of the name. It is ironic that many a time we condemn Western scholars. Oh, Western scholars, they're against Islam, they're against it, Yahudi, Zionist. But in reality, Tabari was first of all a Sunni scholar. He lived in the 11th century. He was a great scholar, but he was also a very objective scholar. The reason why I mention Western scholars because it is the West that has translated 30 volumes of his works into English. It's available now. His original work was in Arabic in 8 volumes. Each work, by the way, each volume is about 500 pages. I pity their wives, they used to write so much. I don't know how they had time for their families. But Tabari himself had 8 volumes of that work. He has other works too. Tarikhul Muluk, as it's called, the history of the kingdoms and the Muslims. And he has a whole volume on Karbala. What is so distinctive about Tabari was, not only was he a Sunni and he was objective, he gives different versions. So he will not just select and choose whatever he likes. And this to me is a mark of a good scholar. So for example, he reports a hadith that somebody said that Imam Hussein said to Umar ibn Sa'd on the day of Ashur, that okay, take me to Yazid and I will give him bay'at. That Imam Hussein said that. Immediately after that, Tabari has another report from somebody who was there. He says, I was there with Hussein all the time. He never said it at all. Because if Imam Hussein, na'udhu billah, was prepared to give bay'at to Yazid, then what was the whole fight all about? Right? So it does not make any sense. So this was Tabari, and as I said, he is very careful in what he recites. But interestingly, Tabari also quotes, because Tabari is an 11th century scholar, he quotes Abu Mikhnaf. He had the book of Abu Mikhnaf in front of him, and he quoted from there. One or two other people that we also need to understand, because people say, where do we get all these stories from? You don't have to remember all these names. Dhahak bin Abdullah al-Mushriqi. Dhahak was actually in the camp of Imam Hussein. But he had one particular condition. He says to Imam Hussein, when you are alone, I will leave you. I will not die with you, but I will be with you until the last. So we hear many amongst us reporters was one of those who survived on the day of Ashur, was this Dhahak. He reports, by the way, Dhahak reports an interesting report that Shimr is actually Shamir bin Dhul Jawshan, that what Imam Hussein did on the day of Ashur before the fighting started, as we shall report tomorrow, that he brought all the tents together and he put a fire at the rear of the tent. He lit a fire so that the people, the army, could not approach him from the rear. They only had to come from the front. When Shimr saw that, he told Imam Hussein, he started taunting. Oh, so you're ready to enter the fire here before you enter the fire? The next wall. At that time, Muslim bin Awsaja was incensed, and he told Imam Hussein, Shimr is within my range. Let me shoot him right now. And Imam Hussein said, no, I will not start the fighting. He can say what he likes, but I will not start fighting. Who reports to that? Dhahak did, and amongst many others. Another person was Uqba bin Sam'an, a slave in Imam Hussein's army. He was captured fighting for Imam Hussein, but he was released when they realized he was a slave. He was not killed. There were others that I don't want to go into the details about, others who were wounded, but one particular source that I think that is available, it is on alislam.org, not alislam.com, by the way. Alislam.com is a Sunni source, alislam.org. Sheikh al-Mufid. Sheikh al-Mufid, you may have heard the name, lived in the 11th century. He died in the year 1022. He has a whole section in his book called Kitabul Irshad, translated by a non-Muslim, by the way, I.K. Howard, published by Muhammadi Trust in England. But he, Mufid, has a whole section of Karbala, and many, although not all, are reports from Hazrat Zainab, from Imam Zainul Abidin. So Mufid himself was a very careful scholar, by the way. He tells us many of the things that we do not hear from other stories. He tells us about the poem that Imam Hussein recited on the 9th of Muharram. He tells us about how Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam reported various other events. This guy, I think you may have heard his name, Humayd bin Muslim. Often you may have heard his name called Hamid bin Muslim. It's actually Humayd bin Muslim. This man was actually in Umar ibn Saad's army. But when Mukhtar, and you've all heard the story of Mukhtar, he started taking revenge against those who killed Imam Hussein. He gave amnesty to Humayd in return for the stories of Karbala. So a number of stories. You can see how we get these from different sources. And there are other places also that I don't even need to mention. But Humayd bin Muslim tells us not only what happened in Karbala, but also what happened after Karbala, because he was there all the time. So he reports the events. He even tells us of the last fight, the last battle of Imam Hussein. He tells us also who did what. He tells us how Shimr, for example, revenge was taken against Shimr, that Shimr was caught trying to escape Kufa, and he was executed. Hormala, what happened to him? I've been asked not to go into the graphic details of how people were killed, so I will spare you all the graphic details. But Hormala was killed violently. So was Ibn Sa'd, Ibn Ziyad, the one that we all hear about. He himself escaped to Mosul. We've heard of Mosul. And he was finally captured there. It was a 3-day battle. And ironically, he himself was killed on the day of Ashura, Ibn Ziyad himself. Other tradition that we have to be careful of, and I'm not going to spend too much time because I know time is running short, but sometimes you hear about the merits of going to Karbala, the soil of Karbala. These are important, no doubt. But we have to be careful again. There are these chat groups that sometimes you, without even you wanting to, suddenly you are part of the chat group on WhatsApp, right? You've all experienced it. You never asked me on it, and suddenly you are on it. And some of the things that people say, we have to be careful. They say not only is it wajib to go for ziyarat, it is awjab. Awjab means it is most wajib amongst all the wajibat. Where did they get this from? Oh, hadith mein hai. But we have to be careful, because then we are actually in the Sharia, we're putting things in the Sharia which are not there at all. One of the other sources that we also depend on, although this was Kamilu Ziyarat, written about Karbala, not about going to Karbala, but the merits of going for Ziyarat. Again, some people say that it's the most authentic source. Ayatollah al-Khui actually refuted it. When we go for Ziyarat, or even when we hear about Ziyarat, we need to ask ourselves certain questions. Don't just go for ziyarat or hear about ziyarat and say, okay, this is what happened. Ask yourself, because you are there. We may not understand everything, but we have a right to ask. We don't have to say this did not happen because we are not experts in the field, but we do have a right to ask of what happened. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alim. Why, for example, Hur was buried so far? As you know, Hur was buried a good distance from Karbala because he belonged to a different tribe, don't forget. He defected to Imam Hussein on the day of Ashur. So his tribesmen came and brought him, that is Hur, to their local vicinity. Similarly, you hear On. If you remember, you go from Karbala, when you're going to Musayyab, somehow you see the qabr of On. And honestly, to be very honest, even the ulama have told me this is fake news, because On actually supposed to be in Karbala itself. He is buried at least, I would say, 25, 30 kilometers from Karbala. There, the locals have various stories on how he ended up there. Why was Habib buried separately? Because the people who were there in Karbala, Karbala was not completely desert. There was a village there, the Banu Asad, and they were of the same tribe as Habib ibn Madahir. If you remember, I mentioned in one of the majlises that Habib actually went to them and 500 of them were prepared to join Imam Hussein, but Umar ibn Sa'd blocked them. So they came and buried Habib separately. One or two other points that on the day of Ashur that we need to be aware of, that it wasn't just one attack against Imam Hussein. These were different waves of attacks which came on the day of Ashur. And the reason why Imam Hussein put flanks, because they would approach from different directions. So all these four waves occurred before Dhuhr time. And the most intense fighting occurred during Dhuhr time himself. Muslim bin Awsaja, the one that I mentioned, the 70-year-old, dies in the second attack. And interestingly, when Imam Hussein was alone, he fought near the tent. And there was a particular reason for that. Why? Because he knew that the enemies would approach the tent. And by fighting near the tent, he was not only fighting against the enemies, he was also guarding the women. There was another reason why he fought there. Because the women were not allowed to come out of the tent in those days. And they were anxious to find out what was happening to Hussein. So Imam Hussein, whenever he would fight, he would make some kind of noise. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, we hear. He would say deliberately, loudly. So the women folk would know that he was near the tent. And many times, of course, because of the fighting, he was led further, but then he would come back near the tent. The final point before we go into the Masa'ib for tonight, which even Mutahari mentions, is that we always hear of Imam Zain al-Abidin as Abid Bimar. It's as if that he was sick his whole life. He was not. In fact, the key term that we hear in Arabic about Imam Zain al-Abidin is not that he was marid. He was called Sayyidus Sajjad. As I mentioned last night, that he was called a Sajjad or Sayyidus Sajjad, one who did prostration a lot, or Dhul Thafana, one who had a mark on his forehead. Otherwise, Imam Zain al-Abidin lived a normal life. He lived for 40 years after Karbala. Yes, he was traumatized by the event. Anybody would be. He would cry quite often when he would remember what happened in Karbala. But he was not this Abid who would just be mar all the time and would cry all the time. He made a great impact on the Muslim community through what? Through the du'as that we have today. Some of the most spiritually uplifting moments and the du'as come from Imam Zain al-Abidin. His jihad, if you like, was after Karbala by his supplications. And in many ways it is ironic, it is the illness that saved his life. The enemies actually left him alone because they felt that he was dying on his own anyway. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. روحي وجسمي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد بأرض كربلاء. It is the night of Ashur. It's the night of Qiyamah in many ways. Because Umar ibn Sa'd wrote to Ibn Ziyad that I think, he said, we can avert a war. Hussein is willing to leave us, to go far away from us. He will not rebel against us. We can reconcile. We do not need to go for war. When Ibn Ziyad saw this, he said, I did not send Umar ibn Sa'd to seek peace with Hussein. And the key figure here was Shimr himself. Shamir or Shimr was with Ibn Ziyad in Kufa. When Ibn Ziyad read this letter, Shimr said, do not let Hussein off the hook. If you do not kill him now, you will never ever get the bay'ah. And therefore on the 9th of Muharram, Shimr comes to Karbala, carrying that letter of Ibn Ziyad to Umar ibn Sa'd. And Ibn Ziyad said very clearly, though Ibn Sa'd, we did not send you to Karbala to seek peace with Hussein. Either you get the bay'at from Hussein and bring him over to us, or kill him. And if you feel that you cannot do it, then hand over the leadership to Shimr. He will do it. When Ibn Sa'd read this letter, he said to Shimr, I swear this was your doing. This was you who instigated all of this. As Adarana Hussein, it's very difficult to recite the Masa'ib on the day of Ashur. But it's also very difficult to do it on the eve of Ashur. Mufid, who as I mentioned to you, tells us that at the time of Asr, Imam Hussein was sitting outside his tent and he fell asleep. He fell asleep, and then suddenly his sister Zainab came to him. Says, "My brother, wake up. Don't you see the enemy is coming towards us?" Hussein woke up and he turns towards his sister. He says, "Oh, my sister, I just saw our grandfather in my dream." And he said, "Ya Hussein, anta taruhu ilayna." "Oh Hussein, you are coming towards us. We are waiting for you." At that point, Hussein turns to Abbas. Hussein always depended on Abbas. "Ya Abbas, go and ask them, what do they want? Why are they coming towards us?" Abbas comes back and says, "Mawla, they want to start fighting. They want to start the war today." Look at what Hussein says. "Ya Abbas, tell them to give us that one extra night." Why do Hussein want that one extra night? لَعَلَّنَا نُصَلِّ لِرَبِّنَا وَنَدْعُهُ, so that we can pray to our Lord and we can supplicate to Him. فَهُوَ يَعْلَمُ إِنِّي قَدْ كُنْتُ أُحِبُّ الصَّلَاةَ لَهُ. Because my Lord knows, "Oh Abbas, I always used to love to pray to Him. I always used to recite and recite with love." Hussein doesn't just pray, he prays with love. "I always used to love to do the istighfar for him." Azadarani Hussein, after he was given that one extra night, Sheikh Mufid says, reporting from Mamzil Abidin, that after this point, Hussein, my father, he recited a poem. I knew exactly what my father meant. What was the poem? It's a long poem. But in gist, Imam Hussein says, how many companions and supporters will be killed, but time will not be content with any substitute. Shame on you, O time. The affairs rest with the Mighty One, because every living being will journey along my path. He repeated this poem every time. Every living being will journey along my path. Zainul Abidin says, when I heard my father say this, I wanted to cry, but I stopped myself from crying because I knew if I cried, the ladies would cry. I knew that my father was telling her that he was going to die. Zainab, my aunt, could not withhold herself. She went to her brother and she says, "Oh, my brother, what are you saying? How can I live without you?" Hussein says to Zainab, "Promise me you will be brave. Promise me you will be strong, oh my sister. Everything will perish except the face of Allah, as the Quran reminds us." Azadarani Hussein. Then comes this time for Maghrib and Isha. Hussein leads the prayers for Maghrib and Isha. As the darkness set in, Hussein gathers his companions, all of them outside the tent, and he says, "Ya, oh my companions, inni la a'lam ashaba awla wala khayra min ashabi." I do not know of better or more worthier companions than you. Neither my grandfather, nor my father, nor my brother had such excellent companions. But oh my friends, oh my companions, these people want me, they do not want you. I'm now removing the bay'at from you. You may leave me, you may go away. The people looked at each other. Hussein says, "If you think that people will notice you, then you can take my women folk with you also, the children with you, so that you should not be ashamed to live." Suddenly Abbas himself stood up, says, "Mawla, leave you? How can we leave you? What will we answer Fatima to Zahra tomorrow?" At that point, Muslim bin Awsaja stands up. The 70-year-old Muslim says, "Mawla, we will not leave you. If I was to be killed and brought back to life and be killed and brought to life 70 times, I will still not leave you. So what is one death towards that everlasting happiness?" Zuhair bin Qayn stood up and says, "Mawla, if my body would be cut to pieces 1,000 times, I would still not leave you. Why should I leave you for just one death?" One by one, the companions The companions stood up and pledged allegiance to Hussein. O Ibn Rasulillah, we will die in front of you, but we will not leave you. We'll make sure that no harm comes to you as long as we are alive. That night, all our sources say that night, Hussein and his companions, they would recite the Quran and ibadat. Some of those who were in the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, they said we would pass near the tents of Hussein. We would hear the whispering sound, the whispering of the ibadat. In particular, one verse of the Quran that the Imam would recite, وَلَا يَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّمَا نُمْلِ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Those who do kufr should not think, the Quran says, that we give them time, it is good for them. إِنَّمَا نُمْلِ لَهُمْ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِثْمًا. We give them time so that their sins increase. Imam Hussein was trying to tell the enemy that you may have a little bit more time to live than me, but you are going to commit a great sin. Azadarani Hussein, on the day of Ashur, one by one, the companions of Hussein give their lives in front of him. A time comes when Ali Akbar goes also. The family members of Hussein, they all go one by one. Hussein comes out from the tent. He looks light. He looks left. There is no companion now left anymore. Aina anta ya Habib? Aina anta ya Muslim? Aina anta ya Abbas? And then he does the istighatha. Hal min nasirin yansuruna? Hal min mughithu yughithuna? Is there anybody else who can help us now? At that time he hears the ladies are crying. Hussein comes back to the tent. Why are you crying? They said, when you were doing the istighatha, it is as if a little child of yours was replying to you. In his own way, Ali Asghar started crying as if to say, I'm here for you. Hussein, he takes his little baby, a 6-month-old, who has got no water now. The mother's milk has dried out. Hussein says, I'm sure that these enemies of mine, they are fathers also. They have children too. If they see my little baby, they will give it some water. Hussein wraps Ali Asghar in a piece of cloak and brings it in front of the enemies. Little Ali Asghar is so small. The enemies think that this is the Quran that Hussein has brought. It is the Quran, but it is a Natika Quran. Hussein removes the cloak of Ali Asghar in front of them and he says, oh people, if I have done wrong to you, if you think that I have violated you, what has this little baby done to you? The mother has got no milk. It is so thirsty. Oh, people, give my little child some water. The enemy started looking at each other. Hussein says, oh, people, if you think that I will drink that water, I will put my little baby on the grounds of Karbala. You go and give him some water. The enemies now started looking at each other. They started talking to each other that what has that little child done to us? Ibn Sa'd, Umar ibn Sa'd thought now he would lose his own army. What does he do? He turns to Hurmala. Hurmala, ikta kalam al-Hussein. Finish the kalam of Hussein so that our army should not desert us. Some riwayat say that Hurmala was the best marksman, and yet it took him 3 arrows to kill little Ali Asghar. When he was asked why 3 times, Hurmala says, if only you saw what I saw. The first time I aimed an arrow, I saw the Prophet himself in front of me. The second time when I was aiming, I saw a lady open the flap of the tent. Hurmala, do not kill my little baby. The third arrow pierced. It went from one side of the throat and came out from the other. Hussein, he looked at his son, who is now full of blood. Hussein picked up little Ali Asghar from the sands of Karbala. He turns towards the sky. What does Hussein say? Allahumma ahkam baynana wa baynal qawm da'una faqataluna. Oh my Lord, you judge between me and these people. They called us, they invited us, now they are killing us. For the first time on the day of Ashur, something that we will do tomorrow, he shows hesitation. Hussein doesn't know what he will answer Rabab. 7 times he goes from the battlefield towards the tent. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan biqada'ihi wa tasliman li amri. Finally, Hussein enters the tent when Rabab opens up that little cloak thinking that her son has got some water. She sees what has happened to Ali Asghar. She asks only one question. Mawla amithlu hada yunhar. Will they slaughter a little child? Don't they have children? Don't they have any mercy at all? The final scene. Hussein himself and Rabab go near the tent and dig a little grave for little Ali Asghar. Hayazadar and Hussein, I have finished my majlis now, but this much I will tell you, that when Zainab reached Karbala, going back to Medina, she stopped by Karbala. When she was about to leave Karbala to go towards Medina, she made sure that everybody is mounted on the camel. She saw one camel was empty. There was nobody on that camel. She looked around the plains of Karbala. She saw a little tent. She goes towards the tent. She hears a lady cry. Zainab enters the tent. Rabab, we are leaving for Medina. Rabab says, Bibi, I cannot go anywhere. My little Ali Asghar is here.